It's Wednesday and it's time for the Word of the Week, and this week we're going to look at two words from parallel passages. So by parallel passages, I mean if you look in a reference Bible in the Sermon on the Mount in Matthew chapter 7, verses 13 and 14, if you look in the notes, there's probably a reference that's going to lead you to Luke chapter 13, verse 24. And you'll see similarities in the two passages, but yet there are some subtle differences. And we're going to look at the similarities and the differences, and specifically our two words today are gate and door. So Matthew uses the word gate and Luke uses the word door. So let's jump in. Take a look at Matthew chapter 7, verse 13 and 14 from the ESV, and I have supplied the Greek word in question, the word for gate, in the verse. Enter by the narrow gate, so the word here is poule. For the gate, poule, is wide, and the way is easy that leads to destruction, and those who enter by it are many. For the gate, poule again, same word, is narrow, and the way is hard that leads to life, and those who find it are few. All right, so let's jump ahead and we'll go to Luke chapter 13, verse 24. Again, ESV, again with the Koine supplied. Strive to enter through the narrow door. Door here is thura. For many, I tell you, will seek to enter and will not be able. So let's take a look at the two words together, one above the other. So poule means a gate, normally like a city gate or the entrance to a fortified city or some large gathering place. In John, Jesus refers to himself as the gate for the sheep, the gate to the sheepfold. So think about a segregated area that restricts access, keeps some out and some in. That's what the poule is in a city. Most cities in the first century are fortified to some extent. There's a gate to determine who comes in, particularly after dark. Things like that. And the poule is the gate that allows access. Thura is a door. It's especially a house door or an entry door. It's not usually the door between two rooms. It's the door that lets you come into the house, or in a large house, like let's say in a household. The thura may be the door that lets you into a particular facility in the house. So if you were coming into, let's say, a banquet hall where there's going to be a large gathering, the thura is the door that lets you in there. So let's look at the two passages from this standpoint. What's the same? Well, we're told that both the gate that starts off the passage in Matthew and the door in Luke are narrow. So the gate is stenes poules, the narrow gate, and for the door it's stenes thures, it's the narrow door. So stenes, we get our word stenosis or stenotic from. My wife had to have a valve job done on her heart because she had a congenital defect that was aortic stenosis, the narrowing of the aorta. So the gate in Matthew is narrow, and the door in Luke is narrow, stenes. The entrance to the good place in both stories is limited. The ability to pass through it is limited. What makes it narrow? Is it physically narrow, or is it narrow through restricted access by the person in charge? In one we're told it's the former, and in Luke it's the latter. The banquet holder, the householder, isn't allowing access. Let's look at some differences. So Matthew tells us that there are two gates, whereas Luke only describes one door. So there's a narrow gate and a wide gate in Matthew, and there are roads leading to each gate, telling us that this is not like, this is like a city gate. This is going into a big place because there's a road, a hodos, that leads to the gate. Matthew employs an interesting rhetorical device. I'll take a brief aside. Hysteron, proteron, inverted order. So he starts out by saying, enter by the narrow gate. So that's the instruction. Enter by the narrow gate. If you're going to pick a gate, you want to pick the narrow gate. But then he doesn't tell us about the narrow gate immediately. He goes into a description of the broad gate, the wide gate instead. So hyperon, proteron is inverting the expected order to make a point. So enter by the narrow gate, but I'm not going to tell you about the narrow gate right now. I'll tell you about the narrow gate later. First, let me tell you about the wide gate. It's an interesting rhetorical device that's used to make a point. So Luke, as I mentioned, only has the one door, so there's no reason for him to employ any kind of a contrast to the two. Let's go back to the two gates. Matthew advocates for choosing the narrow gate versus the wide gate. So it sounds like everyone is headed for a city. Everyone is going to confront a way and a gate. And in Matthew's description, it's up to you to choose the better of the two. Interestingly, the better gate is the more difficult gate in Matthew's telling, right? Because he says the gate is wide, the road is wide, it's an easy path to get to that gate, but that gate doesn't lead to a good place, it leads to destruction. But the narrow gate, that has a way that's hard and it's a tough life to live. But in the end, that's the gate that you really want. So it's up to you to choose your destination in Matthew in the Sermon on the Mount. But when we get to Luke, we're told that not everyone who wishes to enter is going to get in. Not everyone will be able to, right? They come knocking on the door, please let us in, please let us in. And the master of the house says, I never knew you. I don't know you. Why would I allow you to come in now? So in the Luke verse, it's banquet language. In the first century, if you invite people to a banquet, when all the invited guests are arrived and have been ushered in, the door is closed. So this is sort of the eschatological supper of the Lamb, the feast of the Lamb from Revelation, is sort of the allusion here. So you're invited to a feast, you come to the feast, you are admitted based on the fact that you are an invited guest, and those who are not invited guests the door is closed to. So what's the key? What's the key difference? Matthew says you're going to choose a road and a gate, and Luke says it's important that when it's time to come into the banquet, that you are known to the banquet holder. Your good relationship to the banquet holder prior to the banquet will determine whether or not you gain admission. Pretty interesting stuff. Let's talk about redactor differences. What are the differences between the two writers, between Matthew and Luke? Well, Matthew is the most Jewish of the four Gospels. In its themes, its vocabulary, its structure, its emphases, it emphasizes covenant language and a lot of Moses and the wilderness imagery. And here we get the notion of sort of a corporate identity. The covenant between God and Israel is sort of a corporate thing. His readers or hearers with a Jewish orientation see participation in the covenant as sort of a community identification thing. So you're going to go down this hard road that leads to this narrow gate. It's not easy, but it's worth it, because in the end, you're a part of the inside group. You're a part of the covenant people. And being a Jew is not an easy thing, right? There's special clothing, there's special diet, there are particular holidays that need to be observed if you want to be in good standing. There's a little thing called circumcision as a sign that you are in the covenant. Being a part of this covenant people is not an easy road to travel. But Jesus in Matthew says, travel towards that narrow gate on this difficult road. Because if you take the easier road, the wider gate, it ends in destruction. You want to be a part of the group that takes the more difficult road and passes through the narrow gate. That makes a lot of sense in the context of Matthew writing to a predominantly Jewish audience. But what about Luke? Luke is a Gentile, the only Gentile writer of the New Testament, writing to a Gentile audience, most noble Theophilus. And he sets out to set apart a trustworthy account. And he's writing about this Jewish Messiah. So the outsider writer, writing to an outsider audience about the insider Messiah, says, if you want to be included in the feast, if you want to be ushered in and welcomed before the door gets closed, it's important to be in a good relationship with the banquet holder now, not when they're closing the door, especially not after the door is already shut. So we see the difference between the two, between Matthew and his structure and his audience and his emphases, and Luke and his structure, audience, and emphases. They are quite different, and as a result, perhaps, they choose this different vocabulary. Pule, the gate, thura, the door, but now I'm going to let you in on something incredibly important. If I or anyone else tries to tell you that they know why Matthew's account has Jesus using pule and Luke's account has Jesus using thura, I or they are not being honest with you. Because we don't know. We can speculate. We can say to ourselves things like, well, if we take Matthew at face value, he is Levi the tax collector who was present and heard Jesus firsthand, whereas Luke is informed primarily by Paul much post facto, after the events have happened. And if we have to pick one's events to trust more than the other, you can engage in all that speculation, but speculation is what it is. Or you can be more sort of fundamentalist in your approach to inspiration and say, well, Jesus said it both ways on two different occasions, and the inspired writers recorded what the Spirit moved them to record, and perhaps that's what happened. The bottom line is, if we're taking this from a Koine perspective, not from a devotional perspective, what we know is Matthew uses one vocabulary word, Luke uses the other vocabulary word. Each puts that word in the mouth of Jesus, telling the story, capturing narrative in the Sermon on the Mount, and then later in Luke 13. And we can't know why they're different. But what we can know is they are different, and the differences are subtle. Pule, a gate that leads into an enclosed space, a city, a temple complex, a sheep pen. And thura, the entry door that leads you into a house or a household, or perhaps into a banquet hall within a large household. Pule and thura, different words, slightly different emphasis, but the big point is the same. When all is said and done, you want to be on the inside of the narrow gate. You want to be in the banquet hall when the doors close. Same point, subtle difference, pule, thura. I hope that was good for you, and if it was, you know the deal. Subscribe, like, share, comment, and until we see each other again, Charis Kai Reine Humin, grace and peace to you.